So arc length measures the distance of a circle's arc. It's like part of the circumference, essentially. But we're not going to be using the circumference formula since it won't be in degrees. And if you want, you can put a time sign in the middle, because this is really r times theta, understood multiplication. And make sure you put in your notes, theta must be in radians. If it's in degrees, which I feel like on your homework there may be one or two where it's in degrees, you'll just have to convert it to radians first. Or if you really want, you could use your formulas from geometry that are in degrees, but those won't be on your formula sheet. Okay. So what we're going to do is apply the formula, solve for a different variable depending on what we're given. So I would start with the formula first. S equals r theta. Radius is 5, theta is 1/2 radians, so we're good there, it's in radians. Find s. So substitute those values in. I don't have a homework in here, but there's a homework in here. We'll see. Okay, they show. Okay. All right, so s we don't know, we'll leave it as s. Radius is 5. Theta is 1/2. Multiply 5 and a half together, we get 2.5 or 5/2. Units for arc length will be regular units like perimeter or circumference, so it would be just regular feet. On the back, we're going to be looking at sector area, and those will get square units. Next one, we have s, theta. They want us to solve for the radius. So drop down our formula and substitute in our values. 6 equals r times 3. How would I solve for r? Good? Good. You use inverse operations. We see multiplication. Its inverse operation is division. 2 equals r. Units are worth a half point on your next quiz because these problems aren't very difficult. So make sure you are putting on the correct units. The radius also would be just a distance, a regular unit, which would match up with arc length. So this should be 2 meters. The only time you'll put radians is if you're solving for theta, which is the angle. The next one, they give us a picture, just showing us that the angle is pi over 2. That should probably say radians, but since we see the pi, we know that it's probably in radians instead of degrees. 14 is representing what? The radius. They may sometimes give you the diameter. If that happens, just divide it by 2 to find your radius. And they want to know s. So this is an easy one just to plug in and multiply. Radius is 14. We'll usually leave pi in our answer just so we don't have to reach for our calculators, but if you want, you could approximate it with your pi key. Now, anytime you have a fraction and a non-fraction, force the non-fraction to be a fraction by putting it over 1. So we'll get 14 pi over 2, which will be 7 pi. Arc length, again, would be like the distance around here, which is regular units, which will match up with inches from the radius. See if you can solve the last one on your own. This one is going to be theta, therefore it should be in radian. Close, but no. 1. When we divide by 8, 8 divided by 8 will get me 1. If it were subtraction, it would be 0. What unit am I putting on that? Radians. Theta is an angle, and it's, when you're using this formula, it has to be in radians. So that's the only one that the units aren't going to be given to you in the problem, essentially. All right, on the back, we're going to switch gears and do sector area. So again, this will be like the shaded area in between the angle and that portion of the circle, instead of just looking at the edge of it. So this will measure the area of a circle with radius r formed by a central angle of theta radians. And our formula is 1/2 r squared theta. And some students actually prefer if you write the formula like this. So this is an alternate way to write it if you want. Instead of having a 1/2, they just put all divided by 2. It's the same thing. I don't know which one you'll find easier. It's usually like 50-50. But theta, again, has to be in radians. So if it's in degrees, you have to convert it first using what we learned yesterday. This one will be a little bit harder if we have to solve for r or for theta. You'll just have to do a couple more steps to solve using your inverse operations. Bless you. All right. Radius is 8. Theta is 1/3 radians. So radians, we're good. Find A. So area equals, do you like the 1/2 or do you like the all over 2? All over 2? Okay. On your formula sheet, just so you know, it'll have the 1/2, so you'll just have to fix it. Change it to be. All right, so they give us the radius. Plug that in. They give us theta. This is actually going to be harder. That's okay. Because it's a fraction. I'll show it the other way too. So do your exponents, 64 times 1/3, which will just be 64 thirds. Okay, remember, anytime it's not a fraction, just force it to be a fraction. So now we have what's called a complex fraction, a fraction within a fraction. How do I simplify this? Remember, dividing by 2 is the same thing as multiplying by 1/2. So you can change division to multiplication of the reciprocal, which would be 64 thirds times the reciprocal of the denominator, which would be 2 over 1. Now it becomes 1 over 2. 64 sixths, which doesn't go in evenly. So we could just leave it as an improper or a mixed number, so we don't have to round it, but if you want to round it, it'd be 10.7. But we could make this 32 thirds or 10 2/3. Now, units for area will be square feet. Let me show it the other way because it was easier that way, if we use the other one. Didn't tell me to round, so what do you mean just put it in your calculator? To get 10.7?
64 times 1/3.
Yeah, yeah. Now, if you did it the other way, using the other formula, which is how I did it in my other class, you'll get 1/2 times 8 squared times 1/3. So then you just get 1/2 times 64 over 1 times 1/3, which will get you your 64 sixths. Just multiply across the top. So maybe this one was easier. It only is going to be harder if you have a fraction. If it doesn't have a fraction, the other one would be easier. But we may want to switch our minds and go back to the other one. What do you think? Do we want to stick with this one? Or do we want to go to the 1/2? You have a calculator. Always. Then it's fine. Doesn't matter. Okay. So which one do you want me to use for this one? Anyone? Me pick? Right, I'm going to do the 1/2.
Wow. Hi guys. Amazing.
Hi, Maylee. Faith. Frankie. Sydney. Sydney Shook was absent last period. She's on a field trip. Am I missing anyone else? All right, plug in our numbers. 9 is area. Now, make sure you don't plug in 9 squared, just because it says feet squared. It's still just 9. Equals 1/2 times 3 squared times 8. Order of operations, they do parentheses, then exponents, so we'll do this and get 9. 9 times 1/2, most of you will probably just put 4.5, I think. Half of 9, if you type it in your calculator, 9 times 1/2 is 4.5. And then you can just divide by 4.5. If you wanted to leave it as a fraction, you get 9/2, and then you could multiply by the reciprocal 2/9 on both sides. But either way, you're going to get 2. There's a lot of different ways to solve these, but make some of you nervous. But it's just more options. What unit do I use for theta? Radians. Always radians for your angles. Okay. C. C is the hardest one because they ask you to solve for R. R is currently being squared, so what do you think we'll have to do at the end of the problem? Square root it. Okay, so it just takes one extra step. Plug in your numbers. Again, on your homework, make sure it's in radians. All the notes ones are, but I know on the homework there's at least 1, if not 2, that are in degrees. You'll have to convert. All right, from here you have options. You can either multiply the 1/2 and the 3 together, because you can multiply in any order, it doesn't matter where they are. Or some of you will want to undo multiplication of 3 with division of 3 first, and then divide by 1/2. What do we think? Do you want to combine like terms, or do you want to start dividing? Combine the like terms. Okay, so we have 1/2 times 3, which I'll put it as 3/1. Okay? Remember, multiplication, the property is called commutative. You can change the order. Bless you. So this will get me 3/2 times r squared. Now if you're using a calculator, you get 1.5, and then you can just divide by 1.5. I'm going to do this without a calculator up here, at least to start out. So instead of dividing by 3/2, I could multiply by the reciprocal, 2/3. But again, if you don't like this, just use your calculator. 7 divided by 1.5. Get a number. Leave that big long number in your calculator if it doesn't go evenly. And over here, put 7/1. We'll get 14, 7 times 2, thirds, which is going to be a repeating decimal. Lastly, undo your square with the square root, which we will need a calculator unless we wanted to do simplest radical form. I'm thinking you don't. So I'll get 4.6 repeating and then square root that. Alright, so we should get the square root of 14 thirds. And then just choose whatever you want to round to. I think it's 2.1602, so either 2.16 or 2.2. On the quiz, I'll always tell you what to round to. I think I do nearest hundredth. So 2.16. What units will I get for radius? Radius will be plane units, just meters. Because the radius, remember, is just a distance of how long it is. Area is the only one we square. All right, see if you can try D as your closure. Find the area. Since we have shortened periods, we won't do the closure. So 5 squared is 25. 5. 2 times 3 is 6. Those don't have any common factors, so I would just leave it like that. And then our unit should be inches squared. Alright, your homework is the back of last night's homework. So it's the next worksheet in your packet, but you're doing the back of it only. And again, you might want to look at it right now and look at any of the ones that are degrees and circle them and say change to radians. I don't remember which ones they are, but there are a couple you need to change the degrees to radians.